Let's get started again, and hope you're having a good time. For those of you just joining us, make sure that you've gotten your ticket. We've got Amazon gift cards to give away. That's not why you're here, we hope, but it's a nice little bonus that we want to make sure everybody is qualified for. We have to give platitudes to Jeff Bezos. We got to give him more money, right? We might as well. He's one of the gods of entrepreneurship. Again, for those of you just joining us and those of you on live stream, I'm Carolyn Donaldson, a wannabe entrepreneur and learning a lot and taking a lot of notes, and hope you guys are too. We're going to really do a Q&A here, so we're going to have this microphone traveling around. I'm going to introduce the panel. Hopefully you've read about them. I'm going to give them one little blip, okay, where they can, I'm going to throw out one question so that they kind of tell a little more about their career path, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So joining us right now, and I have to cheat and use my notes here, we've got Jake Stein, co-founder and CEO of Stitch, and he is a Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania with high honors, a degree in entrepreneurship and finance. So they started entrepreneurship before it was even cool to have. And he is also co-founder of Rubetrix that was acquired last year. So he will talk more about all of that as a venture capitalist. But on his website, I found all your data in your data warehouse in minutes. 5 million rows of data free forever. That's his tagline, right, Jake? All right, we'll let you talk in just a second. And Zummo Malone is Chief of Schools for the AppleTree Early Learning Public School Charter School in Washington, D.C. I slaughtered that. She runs an unbelievable early childhood charter school for little kids in the Washington, D.C. area. She is a proud Penn Stater, and she's got tons of other things going on, but she's representing not only the nonprofit world of entrepreneurship, but also the women empowerment role here today. So thank you, Ann. And next we have the other Jake. It's Jake Poliskin, right? Another Penn Stater, a proud Penn Stater, who is an associate of the infamous, famous Mark Cuban companies, where he reports directly to Mark, so you can ask him questions and try to get some funding from the big guy, right? He acts as an interface with Mark with portfolio companies and CEOs, primarily non-Shark Tanks. And if you go on, of course, the Mark Cuban website, it just hits you left and right, all the companies that they're a part of, so I won't even go there, and I'll let Jake take that. And Richard White is founder and CEO of UserBox. It empowers products that we probably all use, like Xbox, QuickBooks, and thousands of others, to gather feedback in a massive scale and then turn that into data to inform future product decisions. He's our data mining expert here, right, Richard? And Richard is studied computer science at North Carolina State University. And Richard, we found out, works with Jake, and so we got lots of connections here, all right? So let me start with a big question about, I'm just going to throw it out there so that somebody doesn't have to ask each of you individually. What's the one takeaway that you want these guys to know about, what nugget could you offer to these guys going into our discussion today?
I'd say the one thing that would be useful to take away is just that no one really knows what they're doing. Like when we got started, we were just trying to figure it out, and it took a very long time and made a lot of mistakes. So if you feel like you're screwing up a lot in the beginning, that's totally normal and to be expected. Okay, and you can't repeat nugget, or that you got to have a different one. So by the time it gets to you, you got to be real creative. That's why you're at the end of the line, Richard. Okay, Ann, you next? Okay. Oh, there you go. Richard's going next.
Okay. So for all the talk of like startups are like eating glass and all this kind of stuff, it's way better than a corporate job. So don't go work at PwC or Accenture or whatever those things are. Like definitely do a startup.
Oh, if we have any recruiters out there, they're going to kill you. No, I'm teasing. Go ahead.
I think also, yes, it takes a lot of hard work, and there are days when there are long hours, like that's been described, but I think it's really important also to remember to pick your head up at some points and look around and be proud of the work that you've done and not just get buried in the weeds every day.
I'm still learning, but I would say, I guess mine goes with Jake's. Like, you're going to make a ton of mistakes, and mistakes are fun when you look back on them, but they suck when you're doing them. So, yeah.
All right. How about if we get some questions going here? I've got lots, but I'd rather hear from you guys first. So what do we have out there? Yes, go ahead. Can you just shout it out if we can't get a mic to you? Hold on. He's eating pizza, so we're going to let him take that last bite. Now he's ready.
Hi, I'm Tanam. Just want to ask Richard, so why do you think startup jobs are more fun than corporate jobs?
I don't know. I feel like when people have done startup jobs even reasonably and competently, they seem to fail up and like get rolled up into other startups that are more successful. I think the variability of things you get to work on, right? I think a lot of people come to startups to work on things they're wholly unqualified to do, which is hard to, in an era where every corporate job requires you, every entry-level job is like you need 5 years of experience. I think a lot of startups will roll the dice on hiring folks out of college if you just at least seem smart, because we can't really tell. And you just, like, who knows, right? It's high entropy, high beta.
Anyone else want to comment on that same thing? How about Mark Cuban? I did pull a quote for you here, Jake. It doesn't matter how many times you fail, you only have to be right once, and then everyone can tell you that you were an overnight success. That's on his cover page. Is that true? Is that how good he's got it? He was good with one overnight success, and now he's famous?
No, I mean, he made hundreds of thousands of mistakes. I'm not going to talk on his behalf, but yeah, he made plenty of mistakes and had plenty of failures. I think his number one thing is as long as you learn from those mistakes and don't make the same mistake twice, you're golden.
Okay, cool. Another question out there? Everybody's shy. All right, right up front here.
Jake Poliskin. As a young investor, what would you say is the biggest challenges you have to face, and what are some of the biggest opportunities you see?
I guess I would say the hardest things are evaluating early stage businesses, because I don't have experience, running a company from inception to whatever the liquidation event is. So I have to be able to figure out what's important about evaluating those businesses, especially early stage, and what's important about those entrepreneurs we're investing in. As far as the things that are some of the strengths, I guess just being a little bit more forward-looking and always looking for different solutions for my demographic, as opposed to some of the older VC investors who struggle to figure out that the mindset and psychology of a 23-year-old.
Yeah, okay, let me piggyback off that then. Generationally, Jake, Stein, you're many years younger than I am, but you have to face venture capitalists that are more my age group, I would assume. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you young entrepreneurs get in the face of these guys who still wear the white, the white tie, the ties and the white shirts and the suit coats?
Sure. So I think we, in some ways, have it easier than someone who's starting a social media app or something like that, because we're selling to businesses, we're persuading them in terms of return on investment, and doing things in, the investors we target are people who are investing in companies in similar industries to us,
Okay.
and their portfolio companies are potential customers of ours, so they, I think, get it a little bit. But definitely part of what I'm trying to do in those meetings is pretend to be impressive and pretend to be mature so that they want to give me a bunch of money. I don't know how many investors we've met with over time, like, the success rate of raising money from venture capitalists is definitely sub 10%, probably sub 5% in terms of the number of meetings. So it takes a huge amount of time. But I mean, it's worth it if that's what the company needs, and you eventually succeed.
So when you hear that no for the 200th time, you can go back at 201. It might be the right match.
True, but also, like, there were times where we went out to raise a round of funding and got a bunch of no's, and then eventually realized like they were all saying no for the same reason, and eventually realized they were right, and so we just went and tried to fix the stuff that they were complaining about. So yeah, it's like it makes sense to persist until it doesn't make sense to persist anymore.
Richard, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think it's actually the inverse problem. I think we do business-to-business apps, right? So I think there is a bit of like age bias there in terms of it's hard to build a business app if haven't been in business enough to understand what the challenges are. But in consumer, the bias is the other way. I mean, if you think about the great consumer apps of the last 10, 20 years, they were generally all started by people in their 20s, sometimes their teens. So if anything, if you walk into a meeting now, if I try to start a company in consumer over 30, they might, look at me like, what do you know? You're not on Snapchat every day. So I feel like as coming out of college, you actually have a leg up in that you see a version of the world that the rest of us don't see anymore. And I think venture capital is all about pattern matching. And so if everyone that's been successful in the past is all young, they want to, you actually have a leg up in that scenario.
We have a question over here.
Hi, my name's Aaron. I guess you guys kind of just talked about this a little bit, but personally, I want to go in and work for a company for a couple years and then possibly start my own company, start to get some like my own investment instead of going out and getting investors involved. Do you guys like recommend that? Do you guys think that's like a good idea? Should I just go ahead and jump in, just dive right into the startup culture, or like what did you guys do for like yourself, like some of your experiences?
Okay. So, I mean, my perspective is a little bit different because I am in the charter school world. But before I got there into the leadership piece of it, I felt it was really important to teach. And so I spent the first 4 years of my career after Penn State teaching, and then went on to graduate school, and then slowly folded into what I do now. And I think I lean back on my teaching experience in so many ways. It anchors me when I make decisions that impact teachers, and I think back about, well, if I was a teacher, how would this be perceived? And these guys can talk about how it may play out differently in different industries, but those 4 years were so grounding for me in my career, and I don't regret doing that, even though it was a lower salary. It's just as hard as work in a different way. So I wouldn't have changed that for anything.
I think the answer depends on kind of what resources you have available, right? It's like a poker hand. You got to play the one you're dealt. I went to college and I tried to do startups in college, and I just didn't know enough entrepreneurial people. It was really hard. It was a real struggle. It was like just me doing stuff by myself. And eventually I got lucky to find other people to work with and actually join someone else's startup. And honestly, that probably was the best option I could have made. If you've got people around you that you think you want to work with, and you've got all the right skill sets, someone's technical, someone's got the business sense, someone's got the design sense, then you should go for it. But if you don't, then I think it's a very logical conclusion that, hey, I should just go try to glom onto someone else's thing, learn what I can, and go from there. So I've seen a lot of folks come out to San Francisco, join someone's startup as the first, one of the first 10 employees, and then go on to do other things. In fact, I think Daniel Kahn was here last year. I hired that guy out of college to work at User Voice, and then he left, started another company, and eventually co-founding Cruise, and now he's way more successful and rich than me. So N equals 1, but yes, you're on the right path.
Hey, the other, Jake, let me ask you, because you're the youngest one. You started working for Mark out of college here? Can you give a brief description of how that happened for folks that might be interested?
Yeah. I'll shorten the story up, but for the most part, was a broke freshman, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the long run instead of just be a broke freshman, and started reaching out to early stage startups to see who I could intern for free if I could meet their lead investor, and one of those companies let me intern for them for 6 months for free. And 6 months and a day later, I got introduced to Mark, and he sent me a message on Twitter telling me to come to the Mavericks game. And then I did. I snuck my way into a junior year, or it was my sophomore year, but it was a junior year internship program at Barclays on Wall Street, and then did another internship at Morgan Stanley the following summer. And I asked Mark what to do because I really hated Wall Street. And he hired me full time the first day of my senior year to work for him.
Okay, that's kind of an exceptional story. Would you guys agree? I mean, coming out of Penn State and everything, that's cool. That's neat. Would you change anything about what you did here with your years at Penn State, I guess, for those who are out there still struggling and figuring out what to do next?
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, right now, Mark is pretty heavily interested in machine learning, I guess, next-gen automation and predictive analytics, and I think I have to do diligence on these companies and understand linear algebra, which when I was taking econometrics, did not think I would ever use again, and really tried to forget it as soon as I finished that class. So I would take advantage of all the resources that you have here, and take advantage of the alumni base as well.
All right, questions? Questions? I have lots. Ann, I'm going to get to you because you are our female representative on the entrepreneurial side. So I have to ask, being of the same gender, does that help or hurt you in this world of entrepreneurship? Or what have you seen or maybe a lessons learned?
Sure. So I commented to someone earlier that it's really different for me to be the only female on a panel because I work in the field of education, particularly early education, which is female dominated, and we're usually really excited when we have a male. So this is like reverse situation for me. So I think, to your question of, being innovative and as a female leader, I think it's just, I never underestimate that saying of holding your ground, and whether you're holding your ground with somebody who's older of a different gender than you or comes from a different background from you. I think the work that I do is urban education in Washington, D.C. So our mission is to close the achievement gap before kids get to kindergarten. So we're largely dealing with a really diverse population. And as a young, petite, white female in that world, I look different than much of the population that we serve. And I have learned so many lessons over my decade at AppleTree where I do this work. And those hardest lessons have come around those interactions with people who look differently than you, whether it's age, gender, race, background, and kind of navigating those different relationships. So it goes back to what Jerome said earlier around situational awareness, knowing what you're good at and knowing who the people are that you work with and really capitalizing on their strengths. And I think also, I was kind of reflecting on, my early years of doing this work, and I got asked at a conference a few years ago, if you could think back at a time in your career or a time in your life when you were learning at the most rapid rate, what did that look like and what did that feel like? And I could name it so easily, and I was like, oh, it was my first year being principal at this charter school when there was no central office, and I was literally doing everything from dealing with the plumbing situation that wasn't working, to dealing with the angry parent who was yelling at me, to dealing with the child who had a whole host of issues, all in, your average school day. But similar to my teaching days that grounded me, it's those days that grounded me too, because you learn so much. And there are days when you go home and you're like, did I really do anything today besides just put out a lot of fires? But you do, and and it builds each year. And I think that's what I said earlier of fortunately, we're in a place now where I'm not in those weeds every day. And I think the majority of our organization is not in those weeds every day because we just have more capacity.
Very good. More questions out there? Questions? Don't be shy. There's one.
The idea of mentorship, early stage, is that something that was important to you in your career? Having mentors?
Were there some there that were helpful?
Yeah, I think there were tons of people that helped me and my co-founder out early on. We didn't have, I would say, formal mentor relationships, but friends of ours who were in companies that were a little bit later along, eventually our board members, although that's a different sort of relationship, but also especially other people in our investors' portfolios that we met at different events. I think just saving time by learning from the mistakes of others is super useful. I think if you are both doing a startup or getting a more traditional job, just finding people who've been through it before to learn from them is super useful.
I would just echo that and say it can become so insular of working in your own world, and then you meet somebody, you're like, oh my gosh, you're dealing with all the same struggles that I am. We should talk more. And I mean, that happens to me still now. But I think using your network and finding people who are in the same field as you can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think a lot of I wouldn't think of it as mentorship. It was more peer mentorship. It was more maybe group therapy. It was a lot of, I think, what was very helpful in the early stage to know other people are just as incompetent as you are at this, right? As you said earlier, right? We are all secretly really kind of bad at all these things. I think there's also one challenge I had was with more formal mentors, especially if there's an experience gap, is sometimes mistaking kind of experience for intelligence. There's a lot of folks that you come in the industry and they want to take you under their wing, and you, oh my gosh, what they're saying sounds really smart and makes a lot of sense. It may not be actually the right advice for you, and so I think one of the biggest skills is learning how to discard about 80% of the stuff you're told. There's a great Paul Buchheit quote, which is, limited life experience plus overgeneralization equals advice. And so you have to I feel like the key to mentorship is just knowing what of the 10 things they say are, oh yeah, that's good. The rest, okay, let's ignore the rest.
Yeah, I had a question for Ann, right here, yeah. So in the education space, what sort of technological trends are you seeing? And sort of what is your view of how technology and education in the classroom or even remote sort of style learning will evolve?
We see it every facet. I think, and I could talk about things that everyone's probably familiar with of just how technology has been integrated into the learning space for kids. But I think an interesting piece that is not often talked about is the computer literacy levels of parents of young children. And to what was said earlier around, when Eric said he came to Penn State and learned about the internet, when I came to Penn State, I got my first email address. But that's so different now than the parents who have young children, in the communities that we work in, that I work in. So just to give you a quick example, when you enroll your child in a charter school in DC, you have to submit an application through a lottery. The lottery process is all online. There are no paper documents. And so it requires you to have an email address. The majority of the families that we serve, their only form of a computer is their phone. And that form you couldn't submit on a phone. And I also know how hard I have trouble with forms on phones, right? But then, so you can say, come on in and use our computer to fill out your child's application. But then you're putting somebody in front of a computer who maybe has never sat in front of a computer before. So I think there's a real need to kind of bridge that gap of computer literacy for parents, or for just parents, but people who have not grown up with access to technology in the way that all of you have. Because I think that's where there's a huge gap in just enabling them access to resources. Yeah.
Yes. Right here.
Thanks, guys. I'd love to hear you guys talk about passion generally. It's something we hear about a lot, I think, in tech and entrepreneurship. And just your thoughts on how important it really is. If you found your passion, how did you find it? If not, do you think that impacts you that you're not super passionate about what you're doing? Does it impact your ability to be successful? Things like that.
Let's go in reverse order. Maybe start with Richard.
Sure. I think it's super important to be passionate about what you're working on. I've seen some folks that are working on things for the wrong reasons because they just think it's a good idea, but they don't really care about the space. I always caveat that with I think it's more important to be a passionate person, in that I think if I got to know the ins and outs of plumbing, I could get passionate about solving the big challenges in plumbing today. I don't know what they are today, but so I think it's more important to cultivate being a passionate person, a curiosity for the world, a curiosity for how things can be better, and then you can get passionate about anything. We do a company that's about making customer feedback more efficient. That's not really very sexy, but I love it because I've learned to understand what the challenges are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly still trying to find my passion, but at a very high level, and probably sounds pretty cliche. I guess just I like working. It's weird, but I just like working.
And I've never had a job where I close my computer or whatever. I close my work at the end of the day and go home and don't think about work. And that's just not the person I am, and it's because I care about the work that I do, and that's what keeps me going.
I think one thing that occurred to me in my last company was that virtually everyone there could have gotten another job and made more money pretty quickly. They were all super talented people that had lots of amazing experience on their resume and were moving up the ranks quickly. And I'm definitely in that bucket too. Like I could go get a job tomorrow that would make more money than I have now, and I know that because I've made more money in my last job before I started a company than I did in that. And there's always some like low probability event that where you end up making a ton, but I think the expected value is negative of joining a startup. And so I think then how is it rational to do that? And I think the only way it is rational is because of the utility or benefit or joy or passion or whatever you call it that you get out of the company. And I think some of that is not having to deal with some bullshit that you get in a corporate job, but also a lot of it is just making a dent in the universe or doing something that you actually care about. And for me personally, like I think the greatest thing in the history of the world is the scientific method and using data and evidence to make decisions rather than gut and tradition. And so like I feel like I'm pushing that forward a little bit with my company, and my last company was in a similar area. And I also just really love winning, and I'm super competitive in things that I care about, and so this is like a way to spend all day, every day trying to win at something that I care a lot about. And if I didn't really care about this, then I'd probably do something else.
Are we seeing perhaps a personality trait then, the competitive spirit? I'm of a different generation, and some might say that you guys always strive for that work-life balance, that I never heard of until you guys kind of created it, but yet you're working day and night, so your work-life balance is different than others of your own age group, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll put on my mother hat. So I am the mother of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and one of the things that Sheryl Sandberg wrote in her book Lean In, which is that your career doesn't have to be a ladder; it can be a jungle gym, and doesn't even always need to be climbing. You can take turns that might put you in a lower salary, but it's the right move for you or for your family, and don't be afraid of that. And I think that's something that I really value. And so I worked those hours that have been described until from 2006 to 2013 when I had my first child. And those work hours for me had an expiration date. And I knew that I couldn't do that and also be a parent. So I have balance now. It's not perfect, but I leave work every day at 4 o'clock, and I go and I pick up my children at daycare, and I spend until bedtime with them, and then after work I'll go back to work for an hour or two. But it's not like the old days, and it's because I've had to compartmentalize and really push myself to do that. And I think that's just important to maintain. I think there are times in your life when you'll have more balance than others, and being comfortable with that is important.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I enjoy working. I enjoy the competitiveness of business in general, and I guess as a derivative of that, I would much rather work than what other people my age are doing, which is, I mean, granted, I was a schmuck last night, but on occasion I will do stuff like that. But other than that, I would much rather be working all day than taking time out to hang out with friends or talk to people if it's not a situation where I'm at the very least learning from them and just understanding more, I guess, about people and how I can apply that to what I'm doing.
I never use the W word.
Oh, there
Because
you
it
go.
never feels like, if it feels like work, then I feel like you're doing it wrong. I feel like you ever read a book and you can't really put it down. You're just always want to, it's fun. It's not, it's not the book you had to read for you were assigned to read. It was like you got this book and you loved it and you kept wanting to pick it back up. That's what I feel about the work that I do. It feels much more like building things, right? Whether it's building skills in myself or it's building a company. It's honestly like the world's greatest video game. It's like The Sims on crack, right? You've got all these levers that you've never even knew. It's like you can hire this, or you can build that feature, or you can fire that, whatever, right? But it's so much, like in the right mindset, I think it's not eating glass, it's actually the world's best video game. So that's probably the most privileged thing I could possibly say. But that's my answer, I'm sticking to it.
Good way to describe it.
The one thing I'd add to that is that I feel like in some ways when you talk about work-life balance, it kind of sets up a false dichotomy where it's, there's your life and work, and those are two separate things. And, obviously your work is an important part of your life. But one of the ways I triangulated what I wanted to do was just look at what I did in my spare time, and I read about computers a lot and I read about business a lot, and I was like, all right, well, if this is what I'm doing to take a break from the stuff I have to do, wouldn't it be great if I could do the stuff that I want to do for fun all the time? And so now, like, I spend a much higher average number of hours working, but that's the stuff that I do for fun, and it's not, there are days that suck, but on average, it's pretty good.
It's a recurring theme that we're hearing from all of our entrepreneurs, isn't it? Questions before? Oh, yeah, here's one right there. Okay. Want to get in as many as we can, so keep them coming.
For a startup company, so how do you successfully get the seed funding from investor? Would you share your advice and your experience about this?
Funding for startups, you need to know kind of how they got there.
How we got to the stage of getting seed funding?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah, I can take that. So we waited, I think, longer than the average company to raise money. So for the first 3 years, we bootstrapped the business. So my co-founder and I just didn't take a salary for the first year and a half, and we were super fortunate to be in a position to be able to do that. And also, we moved to a really low-cost area from New York to Philly. That gave us some more runway. And we just funded the business out of revenue from customers. When you're working out of someone's house and not taking a salary, there's not a ton of other expenses in a software business. But then we just built it up to the stage where we hired a couple people and figured we needed capital to take it to the next level. So I think we had basically we showed them that there are people who are willing to pay money for this thing, and there is a demand. So that eliminated, I think, a lot of the questions you might get at the earliest stage. But I think that's generalizable to just answer as many of the questions that they might have. Like, they don't know if people will pay for it, even if you don't get actual customers, get people to sign letters of intent if you don't have the product, or get people to pay you for building the product you're about to build, or validate the market in some other way. I think just making it as low risk of a bet for them as possible, I think, is the best way to make progress there.
I mean, I think seed funding has changed probably the most dramatically in the last 10 years. If you go back 8 or 10 years, it was a very asymmetric process where you had to find a group of people. You had to basically spider the network to find people and to pitch. Now it's very symmetric. Everyone knows, everyone's on AngelList, everyone's going through a Y Combinator or 500 startups or something like that. And it used to be you had to be in one of New York, Boston, or really probably San Francisco. It would be positions 1, 2, and 3. That bias has gone away a little bit. There is now a bias where you would need to achieve more, I feel like, before you can get the seed funding. If we're talking like a $500K to $1 million check, honestly, I think now it's all about, I think, finding, the first 15K check. I think Y Combinator is obviously a fantastic program. There's other good programs, Techstars, 500 Startups, things like that. But everyone now wants social proof. And it used to be you could kind of manufacture it in a small limited group. If you find me afterwards, we wrote a blog post around our first, when we raised 800K, but it was a long time ago, about how we had to spider and talk to 50 different people and who said yes and da-da-da. But now I think the game has changed, and it's very much, you need to look like all the other folks. You need to go through the same accelerator programs. You need to be in the same places. You need to achieve the same level of traction before you even get any money, kind of similar to what Jake went through.
Mark, you
Yeah, I mean, from the investment perspective, these guys were certainly spot on in what they were saying. And I mean, for what it's worth, I would say bootstrap as long as you can. I wouldn't say it's ideal if you can make it just like a cash flow business. Make the money and bring home money unless you need the 500K to $1 million or whatever it is to peel away that next layer of risk to I guess really scale the company up. I don't know. That makes sense.
Did you?
You don't have to build. I mean, you don't obviously have to have the whole company. You need to figure out what's the key. What's the one key thing that I need to prove to show that that it's worth putting in money to go figure out the other 4 key things we have to prove. Right? There's generally 4 to 5 things. Whether it's, will people buy it? Can we get distribution? Can we keep customers around? There's usually, depending upon your business, 4 or 5 key milestones until you're actually a business, and then you're no longer a startup. You need to figure out what the most important one is to figure out first, prove that you can do that out of bootstrap, and then absolutely raise money and scale it up.
All right, I have a question here. If it were possible to look ahead in your respective industries 3 years from now, what do you see entrepreneurs doing? What are some of the newer opportunities? And how will your respective marketplaces changed? I'm sure you have those forward-looking glasses on in your companies. And are you able to glean something for those people out there that maybe are looking for the next great thing? That's a tougher one, I guess.
I guess, yeah. So I think what I hope is that in the future, in the space of education, we'll see more collaboration between different types of schools. I think in the past 20 years or so, we've seen a real expansion of the charter school world, and then of private schools and vouchers, and there's so much choice out there for families, but what we don't often have is cross-sector collaboration of schools really working together in the best interest of students. And so I think we've started to see some of that, both in my own school and then within other sectors also. So I hope that that will continue.
Richard?
So we traffic in helping companies collect customer feedback. Honestly, 10 years ago, most companies don't want your feedback, if we go back like 10 years. Why? Well, because most products were driven to market with sales and marketing. Now we are in an era where those kind of marketing gimmicks don't work as well as they used to. Yeah, for the last 10 years, there was always some new thing that allowed you to acquire customers very quickly. A lot of that stuff's going away, and we're going back to a more traditional environment where it's all about word of mouth. And in a word of mouth environment, people actually care, or companies care a lot about your feedback. And so I think we're entering in an era where, and we've kind of predicated the company on this, every company wants to hear from you, and truly wants to hear from you, not just the like, put it in the circular file over here. And there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to help companies figure out what to do with that new, when you're going from 1 out of 1,000 or 10,000 people giving you some feedback to every single customer we hear from on a regular basis, daily, monthly. That's a huge kind of data problem, and it's also a huge kind of like psychological problem for those companies internally.
Can you make the connection between your two companies? Because you said you guys know each other or work with
I mean,
each other?
we buy their product. It's pretty
And
dope.
we appreciate it.
There you go. All right. So what about you as far as looking ahead for your data?
So I think it's useful to think about, what was the world like 10 years ago, how's it changed, and how that's going forward that Rich was talking about. So 10 years ago, the term data scientist hadn't been coined, like lean startup, if it was a thing, no one really knew about it. So I think there's been a trend of the most sophisticated companies using data in more ways to run their business and hiring teams of people that do nothing but analyze data all day long in ways that are much more sophisticated than people did in the past. And I think what we're betting on is that becomes more widespread, that more and more companies do things like that, but even more important that it becomes pervasive in organizations. So it's not just someone who's an analyst or a data scientist that's using data to do their job better, but marketers and merchandisers and product managers and people are basically using more data-enabled applications and data from one part of the business in another to inform those decisions. And if that happens, more and more people will be like Rich and use their voice, and we'll do okay.
I guess I would say, we invest in so many different verticals and industries. It's certainly hard to answer that, but I guess I would say, to an extent, what Jake said as far as the use of data, and then figuring out what's important with that data, and how can we aggregate more of it and use technology to come to better conclusions with like more labeled and clean data than the crazy outputs that we're getting right now.
All right. We got about 5 minutes left, and I would love to be able to let them do a little more about their own perspective going forward, or maybe some glimmers of information that you might be able to give out to these guys. Maybe what would be something that I asked at the beginning, but you learned the hard way, and maybe you can circumvent it for these folks that are looking at starting a company, or it can be of a political, look at the political world right now. There's so many outside influences.
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Okay, yeah, we're not touching that one, okay.
It speaks for itself. I'll do the thing that I usually do at my own alumni events.
Okay.
I went to NC State. This is Penn State. I feel like we got something in common.
Yeah.
Right? And I usually end it, and usually the administration doesn't like me saying this, but like, you don't know what you don't know. And it's like the hardest problem. I think earlier speaker mentioned that. And one of the things I didn't know coming out of NC State was how crazy like the San Francisco Silicon Valley thing is, like how much, how many smart people there are swirling around, how much money there is swirling around. Well, now, there wasn't as much back then. But I always tell these folks, get out of your comfort zone, go west, try it out for a year or two, whether you join someone else's startup or you start your own thing, you apply to Y Combinator like the Weebly's over here. But go west. I'm happy to host you on my couch again because we kind of got the state school thing in common. But you don't know, you don't know. Go out, try it, and if it's not for you, it's fine. Again, you can jungle gym back across and come back. But it's a totally different world. Again, I think, like I said, it's the greatest video game, and let's think of San Francisco like the greatest arcade. So that's it. That's my pitch.
Very good. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, looking forward for me, I'm still learning. I mean, I guess Mark tends to give quite a bit of good advice, but two of the most important things he said to me, leaving school was one, just be completely blunt with yourself, whether it's in business or your personal life. Just don't lie to yourselves and don't let yourself think that you're doing better than you are, because that feedback is really helpful in general. And then the other nice thing that Mark always says, and I'm in a good position with this now, is the job that you take out of school is not going to be the end all be all. It's really like you can get paid to learn, which is a much better situation than sleeping on couches and trying to do your own startup with no money in the bank and starving to eat. So yeah.
I think advice that I would give too is really surround yourself with people that you trust, because it's such a difference when you have a really solid team that you can work with and rely on. And I think, when you're building that team, making sure that you're diversifying it enough so that there's strength and experience from different backgrounds and different experiences. And then that you create the space to have those dialogues that can be hard, and where there's pushback and where someone presents something and somebody disagrees, and you have that conversation, because that's how overall you get better in pursuit of the greater goals.
I'm about 11 years out of college now, and from my graduating class, pretty much everybody was either an investment banker, a consultant, lawyer, or doctor. That was like pretty much the standard thing.
Wharton School of Business, of course. You gotta make sure you say that.
And I think for years, 1 through 3 or so, people, just thought I took a slightly different path, and it was, just kind of weird, but cool. And then years 3 through 7, there were a lot of my peers who were like asking me questions about startups, asking me which startup they should join, about me to talk to them about their startup idea. And people, I think they had kind of like buyer's remorse of going through the traditional path and then kind of wishing they had gone something different. And then what I've seen the past couple years is that they've kind of stopped with those questions. And I think it's not because they're not interested in that path anymore, but because they feel like it's not really an option anymore, because they have kids and mortgages, and it's just harder to do a higher variance thing the further and further out you get. So whether it's starting a company or doing Teach for America or the Peace Corps or whatever, if there's some pretty risky thing that you want to do at some point, it's going to be easiest to take that risk right now as opposed to 10 years from now. So I would say if you want to do it ever, do it sooner. And then the other piece is that you kind of have a reset button when you graduate college. Let's say you do something and it doesn't work out, you can always go to grad school. And that's like a totally socially acceptable way to switch paths. So another reason to just do that higher variance thing sooner.
All right. Let's thank our panel, shall we? It's about 2:10. They gave us some great glimmers into this world of entrepreneurship. Thank you. They'll be here informally to meet and greet with you. We've got more ice cream, I think, being scooped up because we're going to take another break where we reset for our next speaker. And again, Penn State alum, Dave, I'll slaughter your last name, David, so I won't say it, but David from Weebly will be joining us in just a few minutes. And then, of course, we'll have our friend Steve Huffman from Reddit here, too. So thank you very much. And if I can give a blameless self-promotion for Penn State University and the launch boxes and the different programs that President Eric Barron has said. You said head west, but we have to say that on behalf of Penn State, we got a lot of good entrepreneurial growth coming up here too. So you might want to look at what's